I didn't want to have to make this video. Okay, I have to talk about this. Today, I was watching YouTube, like I usually do, stumble across this weird video. I'll play it now. A man is driving in his car, normal evening. Out of the corner of the frame of the camera, out of a school bus, a cheese stick comes flying at him on the car. No damage was done. The description of the video says that it was a passing school bus. He was not mad, but rather confused. And obviously, when I first watched the video, I had, it elicited a similar reaction, because what was the intent of the child throwing the cheese stick? Now, a lot of the comments of the video suggests, it was probably just some kid being like, haha, wouldn't this be funny if I threw the cheese stick at the car? Now, I was, initially suspicious of this hypothesis because it seems a little bit presumptuous to state, right off the bat that the cheese stick came from a kid who just, he just didn't want it, and he thought it'd be a funny joke if he threw it outside of his window. Now, the first thing I noticed about this video when analyzing it further is in the top right, it appears that a kid is pressing perhaps a phone against the window, which to me looks like he's recording this, which is either A, child throwing his cheese stick out the window and wanting to record it, or B, a group of bullies collectively throwing a cheese stick out the window and recording it to spite the kid they're bullying. But if you actually take a look inside of the bus, there is very little anything. The only silhouettes we can make out, or actually full arm shots, is of one child, which brings into question what exactly the purpose of the school bus is. In the bottom right corner, luckily since this was dash cam footage, we can infer the time, which in this case, the 30th of January 2020 at 2:45 p.m. That's not presumably, it's 24-hour time. Now, it's recorded with a Togard webcam, which may come into question later, or maybe not, it depends. But the important thing is that the side of the bus, it says Washington School District. Now, this means that the video comes from somebody in Washington. Now, so I figured, what if I look at the weather of the time there, which seems to still be reflective. It shows between 12 p.m. and 6 p.m. on 30th of January, Thursday, in Washington, D.C. It's an overcast weather, with a pretty low temperature, which does make sense because the kid seen throwing the cheese stick appears to be wearing long sleeves, which would make sense, but what doesn't make as much sense is why 3 of the bus windows are open. Why would 3 of the bus windows be open if at this point the temperature is so low? Now, obviously, the window open doesn't necessarily mean that it wasn't cold. The humidity at this time was still roughly around 50%. And the only other thing we can get from the weather is that the wind direction was around north-northeast at 9 kilometers per hour. But unfortunately, after this, I didn't find many more leads until I presented this to some of my friends, my good friends. They found a second follow-up video because the man, in fact, had dual dash cam footage and had his front reaction shot as well. Now, initially it may seem that this is pointless information. The brightness outside with this dual version of the footage is just so bright that it's very difficult to make anything out. But what can be made out is that what appears to be a second school bus is actually in the shot, which it's very obviously another school bus. The car that is seen in the second video, for the majority of the video, at the very right, you can see, is actually the same car as the end of the first one that goes past him forward behind the school bus. And because that car was behind him and the bus was in front of him, that's why you cannot see the bus where the cheese stick came from in this second video, which means that that bus behind must be a second completely separate one. It's also important to note that this dual dash cam footage is mirrored because it's in Washington. He should be sitting on the left side, but he's actually sitting on the right side, which is not normal for Washington. But there are still so many questions about this video. My biggest questions mainly come from exactly what the motives of the kid throwing the cheese stick are, but also the context in which the video takes place. It seems so odd that the school bus appears to only contain one kid, or at least only one seeable kid, and also that there appears to be a second school bus behind the first one. Now, I have not taken the time to study the second school bus as much. It actually may just be a yellow truck. I am not used to school buses in America because I don't live in America, but the black stripes poke out on both buses, which may lead to the fact that they are both school buses, and they seem to be the same type of bus, which doesn't lead us with very much. But coming back to the time, this is a school bus, meaning that given the fact that it's 2:45 p.m., it must be the end of the school day. It could not be any other time. It couldn't be the start of the school day, because why would you be going to school at 2:45? What that brings is that, what if this is the school bus's last stop for the day, which in the original video can to an extent be seen, where the bus appears to be going into what looks like a suburban street. You can see two houses in frame, and there appears to be a street sign indicating a change in streets between the two areas. Now, this also could be inferred with the stoplight, because it appears that this is an intersection with a crossroad and multiple stoplights going in separate directions. What confuses me about the video is the way this intersection functions, as it can be seen that the cars appear to move in a very weird way in from the intersection. Actually, I can see the way the trajectory would be done. Now we come back to another thing that I've found is, if we go back to the actual throwing of the cheese stick, which arguably is the most important part of this entire video, going frame by frame, we can see that the cheese stick is only in the thrown spate. Once the kid throws it, it only flies for about 2 seeable frames before hitting the hood of the car and then subsequently falling off. What this means is that, given an assumption that the video is filmed at 30 frames per second, then it can be presumed. I'm actually looking. So, sorry. back on topic. What is important is that if we consider that the 2 frames that the cheese stick appears on screen, as well as the potential, it appears that the cheese stick has already been, it's already gone a substantial amount of distance by the time it appears on screen, which I presumed meant that probably about 1 more frame it actually is being thrown at, which would leave us with a ratio of 3 to 30, or basically meaning that the cheese stick flies for 0.1 of a second. Now, this doesn't mean too much unless the one thing we can find, because when looking at the velocity of a thrown object, 3 things I need to know everything. There's the time, which we have, the power thrown at, which we don't have, and the distance in which it has traveled. Other things fall into that topic too, such as wind, which is why I was looking at the wind earlier, and the wind is impossible to find out with the video given the fact that none of the trees have any leaves, which is very odd, but I guess it's winter in Washington by the time this video was filmed, so it makes sense. But if we can find the possible distance between the 2, it could be discovered as to how far the cheese stick traveled. Therefore, we could know the power at which the cheese stick was thrown. And it is obviously a thrown cheese stick. It cannot have been dropped. It goes too far and too fast to have been dropped. But knowing the speed could factor into what exactly the intent of the cheese stick throw was. And I haven't really... Look, I've told my friends about this, but I feel like not enough of the general public are aware of this, because it's not a thing that people like to talk about. People don't like to talk about, alleged cheese stick throwing incidents, but I feel like people are undermining the weight of the scenario, and I don't know. Some sort of movement, I'm sure, could be started, but for now, we don't have enough leads, we don't have enough evidence, and there's simply just not enough to know exactly everything behind the cheese stick video. And it's really a shame.